Is legalizing marijuana really a contentious issue among right-wingers? Well, it can be. It seems like conservative politicians are at odds with the voting population. Only one CPC MP, longtime supporter of legalization, Scott Reid, voted for Liberal Bill C-45. That's the legislation that will make pot legally accessible to those of age. But then you look at independent polling, and it shows that the majority of Canadians are in support. Not only that, but I got a little pushback from my fellow right-wingers on a recent piece that I did that weighed the pros and cons of this legislation. Does that mean I don't support legalization? Well, I have Tim Moen, leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, here with me. We're going to dig into a contentious issue amongst right-wingers. It's going to be a thing next summer. Of course, I'm talking about the legalization of marijuana. But first, Tim, I want to ask you about this phrase that you coined. I want gay married couples to be able to protect their marijuana plants with guns. That's pretty much everything that I want to hear from a politician. But for our viewers that don't know much about your political stance, can you kind of deconstruct that a little bit for them?
Sure. Well, a lot of people mistake that phrase as me promoting libertinism, right? The idea that I ought to be able to do whatever I want without any reciprocal responsibility, or that I just want to be able to go get high and be left alone. But the reality is that it's a bit of a hook, that slogan, right? The bottom line of it is I want to live in a society that gives people the freedom to make choices over their own property, over their own body. And I think that the best kind of society emerges from a government kind of substrate that is libertarian, and that people need to be free to make mistakes, and they also need to be free to learn from the mistakes and to go on and flourish.
Okay, let's dig into this pot issue. What you just said kind of gives people an idea of what you think. I'll tell you what I think. I think conservatives have it wrong. I think marijuana is demonized. It's kind of thought of as this gateway drug and this drug that addicts kind of use. But I can speak to this. I am a medical cannabis user. It has medical properties. That doesn't mean that I ignore the fact that there are health concerns that come along with it. I mean, there are studies out there that outline how it can be dangerous to a developing brain. But for me, I kind of look at it as, a pharmaceutical that's now going to be on offer over the counter. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I agree. And to be honest with you, I never realized how much of a medicine it was. I didn't appreciate how much of a medicine it was until the last couple of years. I've always been an advocate of, listen, you own your body. If you own your body, who has a right to tell you what you can and can't put into it? And so I've always been in favor of it, just from a principled perspective of liberty. But I had the opportunity to testify as an expert witness in Allard versus Canada, where a group of medical cannabis growers fought for their constitutional right, essentially, to grow their own medical cannabis. And I was the expert witness from a public safety perspective because of my background as a paramedic and a fire department officer. And so I rebutted Surrey's fire chief, who said they're a complete safety hazard, public safety hazard, fire hazard, mold hazard, all these things. But during that process, I met so many cannabis users who said that it changed their life. People that had been addicted to pharmaceutical opiates because they had an injury and managed to get off of it because cannabis helped them deal with their pain and their symptoms, and the side effects weren't as deleterious as the opiates were. I met people who had MS, who were taking a whole host of drugs, who used cannabis to help them cope with the day. I have a nephew who has multiple seizures a day, and the only thing that has been found to work for him and give him any semblance of a life is Charlotte's Web, which is a type of which is a cannabis product which actually has almost no psychoactive properties. It doesn't make you high, in other words, but it gets rid of his seizures. And so I started to see all the benefits. What I saw was people with different types of diseases and different symptoms working with growers and distributors to tailor make a medicine that most closely fit their need. And to me, this was a perfect example of how a free market in medicine should work. People doing experiments on themselves with their own bodies, trying to figure out what medicine is going to work best for them. And I got to tell you, it was kind of beautiful and touching to see, and to see the tears in the eyes of some of these people as they talked about how they've been able to manage their life because of this drug, and how the government is threatening to take this away and remove their ability to manage their own health. It was something else.
Yeah, and for me, it's pretty simple. I use it for pain management. And when I went into the clinic, I was thinking, this is it's so weird, and I took for granted the medicinal properties as well. But I mean, it works for me. So we both agree that this needs to go through. We both agree that pot should be legalized. I did a video about legislation, and I kind of got some flack for it. But what the point of it was to kind of outline that the Liberals and the Alberta NDP aren't promising what they say, or aren't going to give us what they promise with this legislation. They say, we're going to keep it out of the hands of kids, but they're not bringing any punishment in for kids that have 5 grams, which equals like 20 joints or something like that. They're saying, they're going to take the burden off of the legal system. They say that they're going to make a bunch of money, but we had Minister Kathleen Ganley come out and say that it's actually going to cost taxpayers to bring this legislation in. So what do you think the way to bring this legislation in is, the right way to bring it in?
Right. Well, I think you have to start with decriminalization, right? We got to stop putting people in jail who are essentially farmers and growers and users of this medicine. But then the next thing we have to do is look at how, what is the most responsive and responsible way to bring a product to market, right? Is it through socialism, where the government completely controls the means of production? Is it through crony capitalism, where we give certain corporations monopoly rights to bring that to market, but exclude everyone else? I think it's neither of those. Those are the two things that are on the table right now that the NDP and the Liberals are kind of squabbling over the details of. But here's the opportunity for conservatives and free marketeers to really get ahead of this game and say, no, this ought to be done in a condition of markets. Markets best regulate products. They best regulate safety of products because store owners and producers of these products, they simply can't flourish if they're not providing a safe and effective product. And so what I would like to see is a complete free market to this. I mean, the government should be there to backstop the safety, to provide regulations that protect minors. But this should be left up to the people that are good at growing it and that are there to serve the needs of their customers. And that's the proper way. And that's the conservative message too. And I mean, if you meet some of these people that are growing it, I was looking at doing an event. I was down with my candidate in Surrey, White Rock, and there's a number of conservative cannabis growers down there that are kind of hiding in the shadows because they're scared to come out and say anything because they are conservative people, but they know how they are stigmatized in conservative circles. But these are people, I mean, I grew up on a farm in northern Alberta. I know a farmer when I see one. These are good people. These are people that do not deserve to be stigmatized. And these are the people that I would prefer are in the market and leading the market. I would prefer them as opposed to, say, Justin Trudeau's ex-campaign CFO, who is a co-founder and major shareholder in Tweed, which is one of the few corporations that is getting, of course, licensed to print money by being able to have a license to grow cannabis.
So what is the principled right-wing stance to pot legislation in your mind?
Well, I would say, typically conservatism, from my perspective, I think of free markets, of capitalism. And so that's the first thing. But then I also think of social conservatism to a certain extent. And I would prefer to live in a socially conservative society myself. And because of that, I know that you have to have freedom to sin, right? Now, government, if you try to impose a social, a morally social order from on top, you see the same results as when the left tries to impose morality. The government gets this big hammer. They tell you what you can and can't put into your body in terms of sugar or soft drinks or this food or that food or this product or that product. And it creates a lot of negative unintended consequences. And it gives government all this power. And the result is often the exact opposite of what you would expect to see. So if you try to clamp down on obesity, you tend to get more obesity. If you try to clamp down on drugs, you tend to get more of the problems associated with drugs, drug addiction, and criminality around them. And so I would look to a place like Portugal, where they decriminalized all drugs, not just marijuana, over a decade ago. And I would say, well, look, has the social order become more conservative, more of what a social conservative want to live under, or less? And I would say it's become more of a socially conservative order. Addiction rates are down something like 50%. There's far less crime and criminality because of decriminalization. And the people that were once addicted have, in a lot of cases, been redeemed themselves, picked themselves up, gotten some self-worth, and gotten jobs because they're not hiding in the shadows trying to avoid the club of the moral club of government.
So how do you bring that message to conservatives then? I know it's a tough go. Like I said, it is a contentious issue.
Well, I don't think it's as contentious or as tough as you might think. When I was campaigning in Calgary, Signal Hill, some of my biggest supporters, the ones that were working hardest for me on the street, were the ones that were going door to door for me, were social conservatives. And they obviously had some questions for me because they Googled my name and they saw that meme. I want gay married couples to protect their marijuana plants with guns. But all it took was a 5-minute conversation with them to say, look, I agree with you. I want to live in the same kind of society you do. And I think that we've lost our way. And it's because we've given government jurisdiction over morality. And we're seeing it become corrupted as a result. In terms of marriage, I want government right out of marriage. I don't want the government to be able to license marriage, because now when the left gets government, they're going to tell you, your church, who you can and can't marry. And it's the same with cannabis or anything else. Morality is best emerges from the bottom up, with what Edmund Burke called the little platoons, right? The churches, the charity groups, the family, the community. And when you live in a libertarian society, and I mean that from the Edmund Burke perspective, where society is built from the bottom up, and people bear the personal cost of their own mistakes rather than foisting the cost of their mistakes onto others, while you see a much more socially conservative order emerge. People are thinking long term. They're not thinking about hedonistic activity and how they can get immediate gratification. And so this is the message I think conservatives need to get out there and get ahead of, and turn the tide, because we're going to see all sorts of negative unintended consequences for this. And honestly, I don't think it's that hard for conservatives to get. They grok this. They did in my riding. Every single social conservative I talked to understood that, yeah, you're right. As much as we've tried to legislate things from on high, it hasn't worked. It's probably backfired on us. And now it's time to get back to true principled conservatism from the bottom up, not the top down.
Yeah, you're probably right, actually. I was reading a poll, 63% of Canadians support legislation. So I guess sometimes we get mixed up that even though our politicians don't support it, our conservative politicians don't, Canadian citizens do. Tim, thank you so much for joining me. It's always such a great pleasure to talk to you. Where can people find you on social media?
Well, you can find me just under my name, Tim Moen, or Tim Moen for Parliament. You can also find me on Twitter at Moen_Tim.
Thank you again so much, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked that video, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you never miss the other side of the story.